Okay, then we come to our next agenda point. Let me introduce you my banking committee member, Jan Willem Menges. He's the head of the ING audit function, and who worked with PwC for a couple of years before he joined ING in 2009. So, Jan Willem, over to you to moderate an interesting panel discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. In this session, we're going to zoom into the key focus areas for the audit function in this COVID era. And we're looking at this from various perspectives with some great panelists, Carolyn Didmeyer, Birgit Eckers, and Claudio Testa. So let me first get them introduced to you. So our first panelist is Carolyn Didmeyer, and Carolyn is a non-executive director and chair of the audit committee of Alpha Bank. She's also chair of the board of auditors of Generali Group, independent director and chair of the risk and audit committee of Ili Café. And she's also a member of the board of directors of Montclair and member of the audit committee of Ferrero. She's a statutory auditor, a certified public accountant, a certified internal auditor, and a certified risk management assurance professional. So clearly a focus on the auditing sector. And previous roles were at Poste Italiane Group, where she was the chief audit executive, KPMG, and Monte di Som Group. She was also vice chair of IAA, the chair of the ECIA, and the chair of the Italian Association of Internal Auditors. I'm very glad you are here with us today, Carolyn. Big thank you.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Good to hear. Then moving on to our second panelist, Birgit Eckers. Birgit is a partner at PwC Germany and the leader of the banking and capital markets practice of PwC in the EMEA region. Birgit has over 29 years of experience in auditing and advisory of banks, and he's also the global banking and capital markets ESG leader within PwC. And he leads the ECB SSM Competence Center for PwC in Frankfurt. Birgit is the chairman of the bank's Working Party of Accountancy Europe, as well as the chairman of the Banking Committee of the German Institute of Public Auditors. Welcome to you as well, Birgit, and good to have you on the panel.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Good, thank you. So that brings me to the third panelist of today, Claudio Testa. And Claudio is the chief audit executive of Intesa Sanpaolo since 2015. He's a graduate of economics and business from the University of Turin in Italy and has over more than 30 years of experience in the internal audit function. And Claudio is currently also the deputy chairman of the Italian Internal Auditors Association Board and a valued member of our ECA-IA Banking Committee meeting. So also big thank you to you, Claudio, for being available today and to work with us today. Oh, we can't hear you, Claudio. Maybe you are still on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's
okay. Sorry. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody.
That's good, and good that the sound works as well. So, as I said, together with our panelists, we will look into the key areas of focus for internal audit in this COVID era. There will also be a couple of poll questions in Slido that will come to all of your attention. So also to share your views, so also that we can learn from those as well. And time permitting, there may be opportunities at the end of the session for some Q&A as well. So let's get started. My first question to the panelists would be, what would you consider as the key lesson learned from COVID in terms of relations between the auditors and the audit committee or the governing body? And maybe let me start with Carolyn. Carolyn, can I get your perspective on that?
Well, thank you. During the COVID period and after, it was very important communication with the audit committee on the part of internal audit. There was a need for changing the plan There was a need for understanding what was happening because everything was in fast motion and at the same time slow motion. And I have to say that with the communication, which was extremely important and more frequent with the audit committee, there was also a sense of greater collaboration with the so-called second line of defense. So this was a risk assessment approach, changing risk scenario, need for collaboration between the areas, and need for change of the plan and understanding it. So communication was absolutely enhanced during the period and still is now.
Thank you. I think I recognize what you just said about the necessity of good communication lines, collaboration, and also the need to change the plan. Burkhard, maybe from your perspective, what would you see?
Yeah, from my perspective, I would like to raise 4 points. The first one is just to echo what Caroline just said, is regarding the communication. I think 50% of internal and external auditors' key success factors is the skills, obviously, but also to a huge amount, maybe even 50%, is communication. And the communication was, of course, much more difficult. Yeah, there were no informal meetings, there were no exchanges, let's say, beside the official ones, and that is clearly what isn't lessons learned, but is not, let's say, something you can do also in the future. The second point is that it was clear that the focus of the discussion between internal and external auditors and the audit committee in the future should also rely much more than in the past in operational resilience. It's not only because of remote working, it's also that the dependency on service providers, for example, when we talk about outsourcing, but also cyber risk and business continuity management. The third one is the focus on the credit risk evaluation processes, which of course happened in the past. But now, as we have been in a COVID-19 situation, where it was difficult to estimate what is the right value and volume of loans, it was even more seen that this is extremely important to have a much deeper focus in this also in the future. And the fourth one is about effective governance. Yeah? Governance is clear. The principles are very important. It should be effective internal controls in place. And this was, I think, also something which was at some point more distant, more difficult. And this is clearly also which has to be seen in the future to discuss in a more deep way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, and good additions, I would say. And maybe a bit later throughout our session, we can talk a little bit more about the point you brought up about the credit risk valuation processes. So it will be interesting to hear your views there as well. But maybe first, let's move to Claudio. Maybe anything to add from your perspective, Claudio?
Yes, from my perspective, I would say 3 main key lessons. The first one, we had for the first time to test and to check the effectiveness of our business continuity plan, and this was something very important to share and to evaluate with the board of directors. Secondly, as Caroline said, it was very important the communication with my audit committee. As this regards, it has been very useful to be part as head of internal audit to the war room, the structure, the internal organization that was in charge of managing and monitoring the status of the situation. So I was constantly updated on the situations. And the third lesson, I would say, in terms of efficiency, my board of directors changed the way necessarily, the way of managing the meetings. The meetings became very efficient, and we are still using this more efficient way where things are going and the discussion with the board of directors is, let me say, more efficient through the lessons that we have learned from the remote working.
Okay. Hey, and can you elaborate a little bit on how the meetings were held more efficiently? I mean, I guess that via virtually.
I mean that the questions from the board members are made in advance, so we received their questions in advance, and the debate is in this way more efficient. We don't lose much time in discussing the many questions and many themes, and there is in such a way there is more time for the members to understand in advance what are the answers to their questions, and so the debate starts before the meeting, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that, Claudia. Yeah, you also mentioned one of the key lessons learned was about the effectiveness, about the business continuity plan that was really tested in real life. Maybe over to Carolyn. If you look at internal audits, how does internal audits assess the changes in the organization's operations? Can you share some light on that from your perspective?
Absolutely. Very big change in the organization. And there were some very positive things that happened with COVID. Believe it or not, I'm sure that's similar for your realities. Our digital platforms allowed for, with obviously reinforcement, the almost doubling of customer servicing through digital versus through physical. Now, this was perfectly in synergy with the strategy of the bank, but it was accelerated because of the pandemic. And with the acceleration, obviously, a whole new scenario in terms of controls, with the great pressure on time to do that very quickly, because again, doubling is quite something. Some of the controls were temporary to then be reinforced into permanent controls. And so on one hand, the bank was changing. On the other hand, internal audit had to stay in pace with this. So with the design of new controls, there were compliance issues, know your client, AML, organizational issues, big organizational issues, IT security issues that, of course, everyone all deals with. And so internal audit was asked to assess the adequacy and the effectiveness of the change and of these new controls. And they did it in an integrated fashion. So in other words, these digital channels was supporting the strategy, but also the change had to be in compliance with regulatory, had operational efficiency issues, and also had a very, very important element of customer experience, customer satisfaction. And internal audit got into all of this in an integrated approach. And it was actually a very, very good experience. I meet with the head of internal audit prior to every audit committee meeting, which is monthly, and am able to get into the depth of these changes and risk areas. And I especially appreciated this integrated approach, which will obviously also fall into ESG, is now falling into ESG. That's basically my takeaway.
And this integrated approach, Caroline, that is here to stay, or?
Oh, absolutely here to stay. Now, it doesn't totally take away isolated objectives in auditing, whether it be a specific compliance issue or process issue, but the trend is absolutely to cover all the operational control objectives, strategic control objectives, regulatory compliance, and so forth in a single audit, within a process audit, end to end. And that's more and more. Obviously, you always have to deal with the SSM who has their own audit plan. But yes, that's definitely the approach that the audit committee requests.
Thank you. So some positive things that actually came with COVID as well. Yeah. Claudio, maybe your perspective on this. Do you recognize what Caroline just brought forward, or anything to add?
Yes, sure. From a more technical point of view, I would say that many changes in the audit approach started due to the pandemic situation. We had for sure to speed up our audit data-driven approach. We have to speed up our approach in automation activities, automatic checks, continuous monitoring, and so we had to rely more strongly on these kind of approaches. We were in a situation, and we still are mainly still in a situation of having to carry out our audit activities off-site. This was not particularly difficult at parent company level, because we can rely on a significant availability of information, of data. For sure, it is more difficult for our need to audit and to check the situation in our subsidiaries abroad, and so we have to rely on our audit local team, and so we have intensified the relationship with our local audit team. Let me say that this new kind of approach has forced to the audit the need to have new kind of skills within the audit department. From a technical point of view, more skill on data analytics, data experts, and so on. And from a more managerial point of view, an agile approach. We need to be very able to monitor and to give quick answers to the need of the board of directors. And this is a very important lesson learned from this situation.
Yeah, thank you, Claudio. Maybe turning to Burkhard. What we talked about is the greater use of digital client interactions, and hopefully we learned that also brings forward a greater risk of cybersecurity, but also operational resilience becomes a real key area. Can you explain maybe what has changed in last couple of years in that respect?
Yeah, I would like to highlight 3 points when we talk about operational resilience. The first one is with regards to IT systems. My impression is that we are still facing that too many banks are still using rather outdated or fragmented IT systems. And the more outdated and fragmented they are, the more prone they are to fail. And a lot of banks need to modernize, simplify, or streamline their IT systems. And this has clearly also been seen during the pandemic, during the lockdown, where we at least saw that some IT systems came to some point at their limit. And therefore, this is from a operational resilience points, a very important one where the banks need to invest. And I know banks are doing this. But from a risk perspective, it's still a lot of things to do. The second one, what you already mentioned, is about cybercrime. So during the pandemic, the lockdown, we saw an increase of 30% of cyber attacks. Yeah? so far, losses from cyber incidents have been limited, which is of course good, which also seems to demonstrate that the systems are working very well. But if you talk, for example, to supervisors and regulators, what do they fear? Then they say maybe it's a black and white scenario, but I would like to say, so there's a cyber attack, customers losing money, the bank is placing the money for courtesy reasons, but the customer and maybe other customers are losing faith in the bank, and the bank gets into trouble because money will be withdrawn, deposits will be withdrawn, and so on. So therefore, it clearly could lead to reputational damage, and in some cases, this also has taken place. And the other one is also that apart from a technical capability, a lack of staff awareness is to be seen. And also, this clearly needs the needs for the banks to raise awareness and also to provide relevant training. And also the tests. Yeah, if someone from outside can do this via red teams, for example, penetration tests is also something which clearly needs to be improved by the bank. Every bank is doing this, but they're doing this in a different way, in different intensity. I think there's also room for improvement. And the third point I would like to mention is that we see a kind of, I always say, slice and dice of the banking value chain, yeah, which also imposes risks, meaning that small pieces are occupied, for example, by fintechs or other banks. And if one part of the value chain get into trouble, this could even lead to, let's say, a systemic crisis. And this goes also in line that digital services, such, for example, as cloud computing, a lot of banks are using now cloud services for outsourcing, might be offered by just a few players. And what happens if these players are getting into trouble? And therefore, it is so important that first the internal audit has the right to do their reviews directly as a service provider, as a cloud service provider, but also supervisors and regulators, they also want to have the right to do also inspections there. Yeah? That is sometimes maybe not easy. And also, what is the power of a bank to tell one of the very few players who are offering cloud services to tell them, oh, I need a change, there's an additional regulatory requirement, I need to that you do this in a couple of months' time, and so on and so forth. What is the power to make clear that the cloud service provider is willing to do that? So these are the three main points I would like to address from an operational resilience point of view.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Burkhard. And I think also your point on cloud computing and move to the big techs was discussed already earlier today in one of the earlier sessions. Not sure, Claudio, do you have any experience in that regards? Has cloud become prominent on your audit plan as well? And how do you experiencing that struggle with the big techs? How do you deal with that? Can you share some light on what your experience is there? Oh, Claudio, you need to unmute.
Sorry, can you hear me? Do you mean about in cloud activities?
Yeah.
Yes, we are facing this kind of new, let me say, new approach. Is very, very, very difficult because we need to check the situation in service providers that are very, very well organized, very, very strong, and we are starting to face this activity through teams that we are managing with other banks at European level. But let me say that what we need at this point is to have our regulator that help support us in managing the situation, in having the possibility to be strong and to be very effective with deliverers that are very, very well organized, and where it's difficult to enter and to, let me say, to make challenge to counterparties such as Amazon, Microsoft, Google. So it is easy to say that, okay, I carry out an internal audit activity on Google. Yes, but absolutely difficult to have the possibility to be effective, to make challenge and so on. So this is the real truth.
Yeah, yeah. I recognize also from my own profession that the challenge is there, and we also make use of the Collaborative Cloud Audit Group, which is the pan-European initiative that you're referring to. Yeah, yeah. It's not easy indeed. Yeah. Maybe turning to our audience for a question, because a lot of audit teams will be auditing remotely following the COVID pandemic. So the question I would like to ask the audience is, what are your perceived advantages of remote auditing? Whether it's increased use of data analytics, decreased of travel time, and maybe cost savings. Maybe you do more emphasis on planning, or you have more coverage of your resources, or even coverage of your specialist resources. Anyway, let's see what comes out, and if I can have your votes, please. I guess, Claudio, in the meantime, I think your team is also auditing fully remotely, like other functions as well. So what is it, from your perspective, is the most benefit from it?
Okay, let me say, no surprises with regard to decrease of travel time and cost, but yeah. For sure, we have many advantages. We are more efficient, for sure. We were able to speed up the digitalization culture, the artificial intelligence need culture within the internal audit department. It's very important, in my opinion, also the expanded coverage of specialists, virtual pools. I mean that it is a significant advantage within not only the audit department, but we are talking about the audit experience. It's very important to have all the staff easily available, because we can reach each internal auditor very easily, remotely, but very easily. And so all these are significant advantages. Let me say that we, on the other side, we have for sure some difficulty. As I said, the most important difficulty is in monitoring subsidiaries abroad, because we have few data available, less data available. And let me say that in my experience is also more difficult in a remote way to manage critical situation. When we have critical issues and so on, it is less effective, more difficult to manage critical situation only remotely. And this is for sure a significant disadvantage, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thanks for your comments, Claudio. One of the things that intrigues me from this poll is number 2, is work-life balance. Whereas what I perceive is that pressure is actually increasing on a lot of people in our audit teams, also because it's very much difficult to distinguish work and private life again. Caroline, what is your perspective on that? Do you recognize this as a clear advantage, or are you a little bit less optimistic?
Did you say the work-life balance, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, well, we have all benefited on the work-life balance through COVID, and we hope that it's more permanent than temporary. The virtual working has amazed everyone for its effectiveness. Now, when it comes to internal auditing, there are disadvantages to that. There's no doubt about it. But to the extent that virtual auditing can take place, without a doubt, work-life balance. I think it does have to decrease the virtual auditing with regard to, not with regard to data analytics, but with regard to the human relationship part of auditing needs to change a little bit back to our face-to-face conversations. But it's always a balancing act on that.
Yeah. And maybe Burkhard, do you see any disadvantages? Claudio mentioned already a few.
I also see some. I mean, I found it, if I may say, amazing that when I remember our year-end audit 2020, was more or less fully done remotely, and it worked very well due to the digitization, due to IT systems, and so on and so forth. And even Q1, 2, and 3 this year, 2021, also mainly has been done remotely. But on the other side, it was clearly to see a challenge on communication. It's not so easy to communicate bad news or findings when you are not, let's say, at the same table. It's also a problem maybe not to get information informally. But also sometimes communication is purely limited, let's say, to facts. Small talks and relationship management is missing. So, and this interaction between human beings, I think, is clearly one of the biggest disadvantages. You can do this for some time, but you cannot do it always. And when I speak to my people, also with regard to work-life balance, they see it much more critical than what the audience has said on the screen, because the main disadvantages of the people is to find the right balance between, let's say, life, your private life, and your work when you are sitting at home, where you usually have your private life. And this mixture is sometimes not seen very positively. What is also clearly a disadvantage is, at least again from external audit perspective, if you are taking over a new audit client which you don't know so well, and then to do this remotely is quite a challenge. But overall, we have now learned that remote working works, to some extent. But this disadvantage, hopefully, when we get COVID-19 under control, will disappear, because this communication topic, will then become much better to do this in real life.
Thank you, Burkhard. Thanks for expanding a little bit on that, and I am with you indeed that could be really a challenge. And I guess also not so much for new clients, but also maybe for new people joining the team, right? That are new to the institution's organization. It's difficult to find your way around it. I think it's
And if I may add, I mean, very clear, a personal relationship and meetings cannot be completely a substitute by online meetings. That is not possible, and therefore to do this also in the future makes sense. But you must clearly think about, when do I have to meet in person and when can I do it via video conference.
Yeah, thanks, Burkhard. Maybe turning back to you, Carolyn, you explained at the beginning of this session about the audit plan of internal audits having changed as part of the in the beginning of the pandemic. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how it really affected the audit planning, and what was the impact thereof?
Just a clarification, will we be seeing the results of the survey I actually don't see them on my screen. Did they come out at the final results?
That's a good question. Let me find out. Oh, here they are. Yeah.
Oh,
So decrease of travel time costs is the number one. Number two is work-life balance, and the increased use of data analytics. Third.
because I did want to make a point on that. I was very interested with the fact that data analytics increased use was only, I say only, 41%, and expanded coverage, excuse me, the perhaps digital files review was even lower. And that connected very much with Burkhard, who said with regard to operational resilience, he really struck a nerve for me when he talked about IT fragmentation. And that was what I was going to mention also as a potential disadvantage in the remote auditing. It's not a given that it's possible to do remote auditing of databases because sometimes there is the bank is not at a level of optimization or especially integration of systems that allows for easy use by internal audit to do remote data analytics, data auditing, transfer of databases for audit purposes, and so forth. There can be inefficiencies, cost-benefit analysis has to be made. And I also go back a little bit to my own experience in internal auditing, which was also in the financial services, and that was a very, very big issue. So I did want to bring that up, and I found it interesting that the survey sort of matched the issue of problems of operation or IT maturity in allowing for digital file review. I'd love to hear some reactions from other people on this. Anyway.
We can ask Claudio maybe. Claudio, you want to? Do you recognize this comment from Carolyn?
I would say yes. We had to evaluate the situation depending on the maturity of the IT system within our bank, and the situation more or less is different depending on the bank. But let me say that we are facing a very disruptive moment where we are understanding and we are aware about the importance of all these kind of activities.
Are you using now more or less use of data analytics than prior to the crisis?
Yes, the answer is more for sure. But to complete my answer, it depends on the area of the bank we are talking about, because the situation of the IT system is different depending on the kind of business of the area of the bank, and so the situation is different. Entering in more details, and the situation is also different in the culture of the internal audit. So I can rely on some internal auditor who is more aware, more able to use the data analytics approach, and so in this case the situation is by far more effective, more entered in the modern time. In other situation, we are in the same situation as before the COVID-19 era, I would say. So is very interesting, but we had to consider different situations, as I said.
Yeah. Maybe from my perspective, Caroline, I would say that the use of data analytics and the extended use thereof was already started prior the COVID pandemic. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a benefit of COVID. I think it was something that was already on the go prior it, but obviously the use of it didn't become less. So I do recognize what Claudio is saying there. Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily link it to remote auditing or the benefits from remote auditing, but yeah. Turning to Burkhard, we mentioned briefly the credit side following the COVID pandemic. And I guess many challenges for banks on the credit risk side with regards to the level of provisioning from an IFRS point of view, but also from a prudential point of view, whereby the models of the bank did not cater for a scenario we had at hand. What is the impact there for the role of the external auditor? Can you share some experiences there with us, Burkhard?
Yes, indeed, as you rightly say, the pandemic new for everybody. So the problem was in reality how to identify what the risk of the loans and of the customers. Yeah, also with respect to the uncertainty, which is still there. Uncertainty regarding what happened to customers of a bank if the governmental support is disappearing. Do we have a cliff effect, for example? Or what about now what we see in reality? We have maybe a fourth wave of new infections. We see a disruption of the supply chain. And other topics. So there's a huge uncertainty, and therefore it was very difficult for the banks and also for us in our role as external auditor, really to value what is the need for loan loss provisioning. What we see, what we have seen, but which is still existing, that due to the fact that the internal models banks have in place are not able to calculate the risk appropriately, no historical data, uncertainty, and all these things are already mentioned. I would say 70 to 80% of the banks, at least in Europe, they have booked post-model adjustment or management adjustment, however you want to call it, which is an exemption on IFRS 9, but which is possible if you have no other choice to do so. And this is now also a challenge for the banks, on one side to improve now the internal models if they're using this, but on the other side to reduce the management judgment, so that maybe when the pandemic, whenever is over, then you don't need the management adjustments anymore because your models are able to do that. Whenever this happens, some banks have told me maybe by the end of 2022, again, assuming the pandemic gets under control, or maybe by mid of 2023, we will see. But what we also have seen that, for example, the forward-looking information process, which means how to get these information about the future development, has seen some weaknesses. Of course, the banks have data sources. They know how to get the data, but have they covered all the sources, and also how do they use these data with regard to the calculation of loan loss provisioning? That is what was also discovered, that banks have here some weaknesses. Another point is also the identification of the credit risk as such. So especially banks who have a huge retail portfolio, usually the organization is not organized that you do on each and every single loan an individual assessment. You do this more from a portfolio point of view, and then due to the uncertainties, to the lack of information, it was of course also a challenge to do this appropriately. And what we also have seen that banks who have historically a very low non-performing loan ratio, that their experience how to handle forborne loans, especially in these uncertain circumstances, has also become, let's say, a challenge for them, because sometimes they don't have the people, but maybe even not, let's say, the right skills to do this in an appropriate way. And also a point I would like to mention is the triggers the banks have in place for the identification of a significant increase in credit risk. Yeah, so that means when does a client has to move from stage 1, when I talk about IFRS 9, to stage 2, and are the triggers, are they really sufficient enough, yeah, and efficient enough? So these are the main points I would like to raise, and also as we have now the EBA guideline on loan origination and monitoring in place. There are clearly weaknesses in some banks' areas, and they have to do even more to improve this. But let's say, if I might say, the good thing of this pandemic was that this was this became even more transparent and more open. And also, when we talk about credit risk, if I may take a look in the future, and Caroline mentioned this already, there's a topic of ESG, or especially the climate-related and environmental risks. Yeah? This is a topic which is in some way quite new. The risk management of the banks are now working on this to integrate this kind of risk, to calculate the risk, to identify models, and so on and so forth. And this is clearly a focus in our role as an external auditor, but clearly also in your role as internal auditors, to see how the processes are and how this will be integrated in the overall risk management, and also to come to proper calculation of the credit risk, including the climate risk. So these are the points I would like to mention here.
Yeah, very clear. And I recognize a lot of what you're saying about my own institution.
Ferdinand, I just wanted to say, I apologize, I didn't answer your question about audit planning, and I would be happy to give some input on that whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Let's come to that. Maybe first on the credit side, maybe Caroline, do you recognize what I mean? I guess this is also top of mind of the audit committee, right? To see what is the right level of provisioning for the credit risk. How do you get comfortable as an institution with so many unknowns, basically? So it's top of mind for the audit committee as well, I guess, right?
Well, what is fascinating about this, and very difficult, is what was mentioned, in fact, of the difficulty in getting reliable future estimates, because how can you get reliable future estimates in these circumstances, how the situation will evolve. For the bank that I serve as on the audit committee, the moratorium was very important, so it definitely did make a big change in the accounting approach, which was fine. It was pretty straightforward, but it's getting back and understanding the prospects that is the most challenging issue. That's the first that comes to mind.
Yeah. And on the planning side, Caroline, to come back to the first question. Yeah.
Yes. It's very important, because the audit committee met with internal audit very soon after, the COVID taking place. And obviously there were all sorts of new risks, and we've already talked about many of them, but from my little notes, the many risks that emerged differently. So in other words, a different type of probability and a different type of impact, health and safety, the cybersecurity that we talked about, the supply chain we've already talked about, the third party risk we've already talked about. There, for example, the bank was actually dealing with credit servicing for certain bad loans through a third party that was subsequently purchased, but there was a period of time that was a third party, and it was a big issue. And then but we also mentioned the fewer manual controls, the automation of processes, and the stress tests that were changing, the moratorium that we just mentioned, the capital issues, customer portfolios, everything was changing, everything. So what happened was internal audit did present a change in their audit plan. They actually suggested meeting or considering changes on a more frequent basis. So not just mid-year, but more frequently. At this point, it's been semi-annual. We've managed to keep it down, but we are very, very open to making any changes as they go. I mentioned that with this risk assessment, the various issues that I mentioned, okay, yes, health and safety auditing was actually performed. That was not integrated. That was specific. Also, well, actually integrated into the bank branch auditing as well. So yes, integration was maintained. But the revised assessments, the relationships between internal audit and compliance and risk officer were very important to provide a agreed upon vision of the changing risk landscape. So that's kind of pretty much what I wanted to say. Once again, it went back to hearing from internal audit more frequently on their plan, trying to keep the changes, because then you also wonder, well, okay, we've changed. What's happening to our coverage now? Audit plans are obviously risk assessed, but there were some important processes that got pushed off. So when are we going to reach that? So there was also that question mark on how to recover on areas that had been postponed. But we were very happy with the reaction to increase auditing on health and safety, cyber, supply chain, and everything that I just mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, the interesting thing that you also mentioned is the required coordination between second and third line. Had to get a shared vision on the risk landscape, as you mentioned. Yeah, Claudio, you recognize that as well. From your angle, do you see a closer collaboration with the second line?
Yes. In my opinion, this is a very important topic. It is important that the internal control functions are able to collaborate each other. For sure, the most important thing is that each of us has to maintain its independence. Okay, but having said that, the more the control function are able to share information, to collaborate, the stronger is the internal control function within the bank. This is my opinion. In my experience, we decided at Intesa Sanpaolo to have a specific managerial committee composed of the internal control function, not only the internal control function, but also the head of organization and the manager who is responsible for the balance sheet, and an integrated risk assessment. Once a year, each function carry out its single risk assessment, and we share this information in order to produce and to have for our board of directors a unique vision, a unique risk assessment, final risk assessment. The internal audit has the role to close the cycle, so the internal audit give the final opinion with regard to each component of the universe of the group, and then we started to join the risk assessment with the risk appetite framework of the bank. So I mean that when issues are not well solved, are in delay, are very important, they become early warning breaches within the risk appetite framework of the bank. So also the qualitative information are part now of the risk appetite framework of the group. We started to have a unique program for the talent within the internal control function. We have a program in order to manage to rotate our best staff from internal audit to risk assessment, from risk assessment to compliance, and so on. And this is very important because, in my opinion, in the near future, we need to have within the bank all the manager within the internal control function need to have a significant experience not only in one single control function, but in all the internal control function, because we need to have a complete capability to vision the internal control system from different point of view. And okay, this is a very important experience. Let me say that the audit committee, the board of directors within my bank is very happy about this experience. And this morning we have seen that the opinion of the board of directors of our stakeholder about the effectiveness of the internal audit is probably the most important way to measure our performance, our role, our capability. And let me say that in my case, this experience is very effective also in order to show to the board of directors our capability. And last but not least, this kind of experience is also very useful in order to increase the risk culture within the bank, because when the internal control function are able to collaborate, to work, to use the same language, to share information, the more effective is for the internal control system of the bank and for the risk culture of the bank.
Yeah, interesting perspectives, Claudio. Maybe also good to go back to the audience and to see whether they are collaborating with other lines to complete the risk oversight, and also whether or not they will provide a combined risk assessment to the board, yes or no. Can we get up the Slido questions, please? So first off, the question is, do you collaborate with other lines to complete the risk oversight? I guess that is still 100% so far. Let's see what comes next. It seems like most of us are indeed collaborating with other lines. So I guess, Claudia, that must be good to hear that you're not the only one.
It's very interesting.
Yes, you recognize this outcome?
Very good. Very good, very good. It's a very good signal, in my opinion.
Yeah. Maybe turning to the second question, then do you also provide a combined risk assessment to the board? Let's get your votes in, please. It's going with 50-50. No. There's not so much a clear cut as the previous one, right? So it seems.
It makes sense to me, because the objectives for each are different.
What are you used to, Caroline, at your institution?
I'm used to. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Caroline. Please.
Oh, go ahead. Okay.
No, in my experience, for sure, my suggestion is to fix the level, a high level at which each control unit has to define and carry out the risk assessment, and otherwise, it is difficult to merge and to have an integrated report. But it is possible. It is possible at a very high level, and it is very useful for the board of directors, for the audit committee, also for the European Central Bank to have the control function that are able to not only to share information, but to debate where, if and where there are different opinions, because it is very useful in my experience. So we have, in some cases, we have different opinions. But we maintain different opinions, but we are very able to explain our different opinions to the board of directors, and this is a very useful and effective service towards our governance body, but for sure is important to fix the level at which each control function has to carry out its exercise.
Yeah, maybe first go back to Carolyn, because you started off on a different foot, Carolyn, saying that there are different objectives of the report.
What I was trying to say was it's fantastic, the collaboration to come out with an overall risk assessment, which covers operational, compliance, credit, everything. That's great. But when it comes to planning on the part of each of the control functions, the prioritizing takes a different foot, because compliance is interested in prioritizing compliance issues.
Yeah.
Internal audit is process oriented, yes, covers everything, but if credit risk is the biggest risk of the organization, they're not necessarily going to do an audit plan that's all credit risk. No, obviously not. So it depends on the objectives, the control objectives of each function.
And if I may add, regarding the first question, I mean, for me it's very clear. Internal audit must have discussions with the first and the second line functions on business risks, key controls, control weaknesses, incidents, and so on. And those insights must be used when performing the internal audit risk assessment and audit planning. I think that's clear. Otherwise, I would get some doubts, if I may say, on the governance of internal audit. Regarding the second one, I think there are good reasons to separating the three lines of defense. To be honest, and each function needs to derive its own assessments independently. I think that's the starting point. Yeah. And a common view has clearly some advantages, as you all said, but it's also in some way risky, because maybe some nuances or some, let's say, critical things might be overlaid by other points. Yeah, and I think it's clearly important that all these risks which might have identified are clearly brought to the attention of the board, and therefore a common view as such, and that's it, might become risky. It depends how you do this. It's also clearly what kind of risk we are talking about, but I would be, let's say, a bit reluctant on that.
Yeah, clear. I think clear views. Thank you all. Maybe some small, short questions to each of you individually, starting with you, Carolyn. With regards to digitalization and cyber, do you believe that the internal audit function provides you with, as part of the audit committee, with a comprehensive enough picture on IT controls and about security?
Well, thank you for this question. I have to say that a full picture of IT security and controls, for that matter, I believe, from the audit committee perspective, should come from management. And in fact, in the reality that I deal with, more than one, management is requested to give a 360 view of the cybersecurity as is in the future and what is expected in the future. So we're talking about an overall, what do you call it, web type graphics, governance, prevention, detection, response, with all its various components, whether they're 20 or 50, depending on the model. So I expect that from management. But at the same time, we need internal audit to provide assurance on that. And so that is my take on this. We need management to represent it, and we need assurance on the part of internal audit. With the overall view of IT controls and security, there's always the as is, and then there's also the projects for improvement. And their internal audit comes in as well. In management will say, we're going to do this and this to improve, and internal audit needs to provide a little bit of assurance on the project management. So it's twofold.
Yeah.
Also, and that's on security. When it comes to controls, I have actually expressed a need to understand the overall situation of controls, because it's not clear how much is manual versus digital as far as controls go. And in fact, occasionally a fraud comes up, and you learn that if fraud went badly or occurred because of manual controls versus digital. So you say, well, we should be increasing the digital. So one needs a perspective of how advanced are we, and there you get into the agile and the maturity of IT systems and the integration of IT systems that we've made mention of. How mature are we on the IT systems? How digital are we in controls? A full picture, full panorama, not yet, but it's coming.
Clear. Thank you, Caroline. Maybe a different question for you, Burkhard. We talked about AML earlier today as well. It's clearly an important point of attention for audit committees, but also for the internal audit function and the second line as well. How do you see the collaboration between all of those players? So the internal audit departments, the external auditor, the compliance function. Can you share some insights there?
Yeah, I mean, as you rightly said, AML is a very important topic, and my observation is it has become an even more important topic. So when you speak, for example, to the ECB in his role as a supervisor, they clearly say, if we discover a severe AML case in a bank, no excuse, which means the responsible executive board member has to leave the bank, for example, and this has happened in the past, as you know, I guess all these examples, but also it even could lead that a fit and proper assessment will be done again with some executive board members or even board members. So you see, it's extremely important. And what we also see, European Commission wants to establish an AML authority, which is focusing not only on banks with regard to AML, but also to other industries, notaries and jewelers, and you know all that. But it's also a topic how, let's say, the internal audit department, also we in our role as external audit, are dealing with this. And for example, ECB. They have now started to send letters to the chair of the supervisory board in those cases where the local authorities, which are still responsible for monitoring the AML topics, have discovered severe findings in the processes, not a case, but in the processes. Yeah. So, and then, for example, they ask questions whether the chief compliance officer, the AML compliance officer, can still be considered as positive contributors to the sound functioning of the compliance function. Or another question is whether the compliance and AML reports are sufficiently comprehensive and documented. So, and these points are clearly points which has to become much more in attendance of the internal audit functions. I know you're doing all this, but I think even more, And it also has to be clear for members of the audit committee, but also for members of the board of banks, that the discussion about AML is not just ticking a box. Okay, now we have discussed this, we have seen the report, and that's it. No, it goes clearly beyond. And the fact that, for example, ECB in its role as supervisor is sending those kind of letters to the chair of the board and asking the question to the board, and saying, if you say yes, the compliance officer is still the right one, and please explain why you think he or she is the right one, clearly sees that is that is for the board is not to say, well, operationally responsibility is with the executive board and that's it. No, there also is some indirect responsibility, and this leads directly also to the internal audit functions. What are you doing there? And for example, in Germany, as you might know, in Germany, there's a clear the auditors have a clear mandatory part to look also at the anti-financial audit and also on the AML as well. So that means we are also much more involved in this part, and therefore AML has to be on the very top of the internal audit work, maybe even more than it used to be in the past.
Yeah, and I do recognize what you're saying also about the situation in Germany, but also that it should be very high on the agenda. Clear. Thanks, Burkhard. Maybe over to you, Claudia, my final question. We talked about ESG and that it's on top of the agenda of the audit committee, also as a new topic. How are you as internal audits adapting your plan and how are you addressing this topic?
Yes, William. Then for sure, ESG is another priority in the agenda of my audit committee. Well, at the beginning of this year, I decided to create a specific unit within the audit department who is in charge of I named it strategic risk, the view on strategic risk, so the view on the industrial plan, but within the strategic risk, there is also the ESG. As a bank, we have decided not to add ESG risk in the list of the risk categories, but we decided that ESG is a strategic risk, but it is made of credit risk, reputational risk, operational, and so on. And let me say that about the audit plan, the agenda is quite easy at the moment because in 2021 we decided to carry out a specific audit on the governance system, the governance ESG system within the group. And next year we will foresee a specific audit on the activities that are ongoing with regards to the plan that we communicated as each bank communicated to ESG to the European Central Bank after the 2021 ESG risk assessment that we were requested to carry out. So next year we will start to monitor the status of the art with regards to the different activities that the group has in the 2022 plan.
Okay, very clear. Thank you, Claudio. I think with that also it brings us to the end of this session, and I am so sorry. I need to apologize to the audience because there's no real room actually to answer or to do the questions and answers from the audience. But nevertheless, I hope you had a good session. We covered a lot. And we talked about how audit plans were changed as part of COVID, and how important it also was to continue with the communication and the dialogue between audit committees and internal audit functions. We talked about the topic about cyber and operational resilience, and the new challenges there, also with us coming and clients interacting more digital with the bank. We talked about credit risk and the challenges there, and how difficult it is actually for banks at the moment to get reliable future estimates about the cash flows. But nevertheless, we need to deal with that. We talked about remote auditing, the benefits of remote auditing, but also some of the challenges. and also the collaboration with the second line of defense, and how important it is to come to a consistent view on risk. But sometimes it's good to get an integrated report, but maybe also not entirely, because it serves different purposes, as we discussed. Many thanks for your time and efforts and your insights, Carolyn, Burkhard, and Claudio. Much appreciated, and big thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye bye.